What we'd like to do is maybe spend about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay.
Tell a little bit about myself, about my family, and why we're in the race, and kind of some overarching things that I think are important to all of us. So I'm Martin Sepulveda. I'm running for Congress in this district because it's my home. I live here. I was raised here. My family's been in this community since the 1870s when they homesteaded 160 acres at Rural University in Tempe. I graduated from Arizona State. I met my wife there. We raised our family in Chandler. I started my first company in Chandler, and I was elected twice to the Chandler City Council. I'm a military guy. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 17. I'm now 52. I'm a commander in the Navy Reserve. My current assignment is SEAL Team 17 in Coronado. I'm a combat vet. I've served 6 different tours overseas since Desert Storm to Afghanistan about last year. In that experience, I tell you, I've seen the best and the worst that happens in war. And coming back to my home, to Chandler, Arizona, in my mind, in my heart, I vowed I'd do whatever I could to make this place better. I really care about this community, our state, and our nation. I'm a small business owner. I started my company, my first company, about 12 years ago. Before that, I worked for a very large construction company, McCarthy. They actually done some expensive work. Before that, I worked for the Department of Commerce. So I've got over 20 years of business experience in public and private sectors. My biggest takeaway from that is this: government doesn't create jobs. The best it can do is create a reasonable regulatory environment, a predictable tax environment, and get out of the way. Let the private sector create jobs, create wealth. It's so easy to hear people say, hey, we're in government, we create these jobs. That's not the way it works. The 2 terms I served in the Chandler City Council are non-consecutive terms. And I make that characterization because I'm not a career politician. I'm not one of these guys that has to be in office or always running for the next office. But the important thing for me during that time is I was able to serve people who care about the community, how we spent their money, what the priorities of the community were. And we didn't always get along. So many people who lived in Chandler for quite some time probably remember some of the bigger disputes we had on that council for various things. But one thing we always did is we agreed to be fiscally responsible. The 8 years I was on the council, we balanced every budget. We had cash reserves. We even lowered taxes a couple of times. Those budgets in the late 90s ranged from $500 million. The last budget I was having to do with 2007, 2008 was $1.2 billion. So very big, complex budgets. Chandler's the 4th largest city in the state. So changing speeds a little bit, some of these overarching things. Jobs in the economy. We've been told for the past several months the economy is getting better, the recession is over, unemployment is trending downward. The last national average we got, unemployment average, is 8.1%. It's better than 9. We compared that to CD9, this district. We've got some fairly high employment, some very significant employment base. It's 7.5%. Sounds a lot better. But the real issue is this. That's one component of the picture. Underemployment, people work more than one job, and typically not even 40 hours, working 2 jobs, it's 5.1%. Those who just stopped looking, it's 1.3%. So now you're not looking at 7.5% unemployment average, it's almost 14%. That's not much of a recovery. The debt and deficit spending. This past December, for the first time since World War II, the debt surpassed the GDP. What we owe the nation is more than we produce per year. Is there a wake-up call? Still got any national attention? They got my attention. So the president puts together a non-binding bipartisan commission. It was a bust. Nothing happened with that. There are some proposals. Some are pretty good proposals to talk about the debt, how to deal with deficit spending, but there's no traction. Probably because it's an election year. There is talk again about another stimulus package, increasing the debt ceiling one more time. You know, in my opinion, as an American, as a small business owner, as just a casual observer, actually not a casual, more than just a casual observer of the economy, those 2 proposals are probably as dangerous as they're irresponsible. My priority as a congressman would be this. My first priority, probably my only priority. Produce a balanced budget. find those like-minded members that I know are there, and do whatever it takes to get a balanced budget amendment brought forward. I think not to do that is more than irresponsible. When you have a president and a Congress that doesn't deal with the deficit spending or the debt, that's more dangerous to our country, to the sovereignty of this country, than any foreign nation or military could be. So kind of wrapping up, we could talk about this election being about the economy, but it's more than that. It's all of us here. It's our family, our friends, our neighbors. How do we come together? How do we move forward as Americans and get beyond this crisis? Because it is a crisis. Whether we really believe the government's too big, too costly, too ineffective, and it doesn't belong in every facet of our life. And probably just as importantly, whether we believe as our founding fathers did, the government is best which governs the least. And we're Arizonans. We're here for a reason. We want to be here. We've got this Western spirit. Our heritage is the West. We're independent. We're self-reliant. We don't need the government to tell us which way the wind blows. That's not for us. So coming back to myself full circle, I'm very proud that my family's been here for almost 150 years in this district. You know, I feel grateful that I was able to be born and raised here and raise my family here. I feel blessed that after 6 different combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, both my son and I made it back safely. I've seen a lot of the world, and I know how precious our liberty is, and I know it's worth fighting for. So, to wrap up, I will tell you my experience is intact, and my desire is more intact to serve this district and the state and Congress. So I'd like to answer questions if I could. That's kind of an overarching view of me, and certainly would like to entertain any questions.
Martin, I do have a question. I have a document here from the city of Chandler, and you said you're on the council. It's called the Next 20 document. This document is very disturbing to me. My background, as I mentioned, I worked at Intel before, and I have a background in environmental engineering. This Next 20 document is called A New Progressive Agenda for Chandler. This is being implemented right now in our city, and it's being done under the premise of the United Nations. The United Nations has come into our cities, all in our state and all through the country, implementing what's called Agenda 21. Agenda 2021, do you know what Agenda 21 is? Agenda 21 is all under the premise that we need to save the earth, each and every one of us, from global warming. And there's over 31,000 scientists that have said global warming doesn't exist. So we're allowing the United Nations to come into our city and direct us on everything from smart meters to all of us are carbon footprinted, how much carbon emissions each one of us produce, CO2, etc. And it's all done so they can eventually control where we live, what we eat, you know, how we travel, etc. All under the premise of global warming.
And sustainability.
And sustainability.
All these buzzwords you hear about eco-friendly environments, live, work, play.
Correct.
You know.
So,
Smart growth.
yeah, smart growth. And I'm very concerned about it. And you were one of the people on the council when this happened. I don't know if you knew or were aware that this was the United Nations directing this document. If you read through this document, it says over and over, the agenda for the 21st century, that's the same terminology that's used in the UN.
When was that adopted?
It's in 2007. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, what are you going to do to get us out of this horrific program for our state and for our country to get out of the United Nations?
Can I do one quick disclaimer there?
Yes.
My last term on the council, I was in Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq, I'm sorry. So my last tour in Iraq was 2007, 2009. So my term actually expired while I was gone. But that's my disclaimer.
Okay.
My background's in industrial development. And so these buzzwords have been used forever. Sustainability, eco-friendly, live, work, play. Yeah, if you delve in a little bit further, you see that same verbiage being used with Agenda 21. Mm-hmm. I think there's a summit in Rio, early 1900s.
Yeah, 1992.
Okay, yeah. And so it's funny how it's kind of bubbled up, and it's kind of buzzwords for really taking over, or actually, we would say, eminent domain, mm-hmm. giving municipal jurisdictions, any municipal jurisdictions, the authority to take land that isn't really theirs.
Right.
If you study, I won't say study, if you visit my record on the city council, I'm the guy that raised hell with taking people's property and not paying property. whether it was trying to condemn property that we shouldn't have because it was in the county. We didn't want a landfill or actually a transfer station. You've lived here for quite some time. Remember the big fight about the transfer station? The issue is this. Properly zoned, the parcel of land was in the county, not the city. So we had no jurisdiction. But my colleagues and staff didn't want the transfer station because it was across the street from a park we spent a lot of money on. I got it. But that still didn't give us, the city, the right to deny the property rights of a private business who were already zoned appropriately to pursue his business interests. I got outvoted 6-1. I didn't care. It was all about property rights. And it was appropriate and not appropriate. The irony is that even after the 6-1 vote, they tried to restrict the weight on the road, which was totally illegal. I convinced one of the guys who voted on the winning side to revisit that thing because that was way over the line. It's one thing to say, this isn't in our jurisdiction, but we don't like it, we're going to vote against it. That's just a stupid protest vote. It's still wrong. But it's another thing to say that, hey, this road that belongs to the city and the taxpayers, we're going to weight restrict it so this guy can't do his business on a piece of property that we have no jurisdiction anyway. Well, we overturned that. And so because that was overturned, it made it a lot easier for the county supervisors to say, yeah, okay, you go ahead and vote against it. The supervisor who's in charge of this, or electing this area, but he lost 4-1. Why? Because property rights. I've always stood for property rights. Whether it's downtown Chandler, this transfer station, because I don't believe in taking unless it's absolutely necessary. What I found when we would take property, we wouldn't give fair market value to play this game. I've never been for that. Now, but specifically with this document, it's become the vernacular that's permeated all the development circles, whether it's state, federal, or local.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. You know, the basic premise is wrong. It violates our sovereignty. And whether it's bad enough that it's not our federal government, but what happens is this organization, this international organization, is rooted now in our federal bureaucracy. By virtue of that, they're able to cut checks, grants, however they characterize them, for all these communities that agree with this sustainability thing to make it a much nicer or much more acceptable way to do business. Is it legal? It probably is legal. Is it ethical? Absolutely not.
Well, for example, the city of Chandler accepted $11 million from the American Resource and Reinvestment Act from Obama in 2009, and they're using, you know, and I talked to Pat McDermott, who's on the assistant city to the mayor, and he has no problems. I asked him point blank, do you have any problems accepting federal stimulus money for implementing these programs? And he said no, because it's already there, and if I don't use it, some other city will use it. Which means he's making an inflation tax for all Americans. You know, he's deferring it from the city of Chandler people, so they don't have to pay, you know, for these environmental upgrades. But instead, he's deferring it to every American. And this is morally wrong, especially with the condition that we're in. We're in the 11th hour. We're on the verge of collapse. He has no problem accepting federal funds for implementing a program that we shouldn't even be implementing.
It's morally and ethically wrong.
So this is the kind of craziness that we need to get our state out of, and we need to get the federal government out of.
Forget the morality or the lack thereof of this agenda right here. What about all the other programs the federal government funds these local communities? Now you're ingratiating. Now they've got their hooks in.
Right.
You know, and it's not money that grows on trees. We know that now.
Right.
I thought it did grow on trees. Isn't that why we're $16 trillion in debt?
Well, they're growing up trees, right?
We're going to run out of trees at this rate.
Yeah, we're cutting them down. That's how smart we are. Well, all I would ask, and I agree with you, all I would ask is if you've been around Chandler for any length of time, visit my record on that council for 2 different terms, and you'll see that I was against eminent domain. I fought a lot of fights and lost 6-1, 5-2. I didn't care. I didn't care. You know, as far as these federal programs go, that's always a problem when you accept money.
Right.
I don't care if it's federal government or something that's backed up by something more nefarious than our federal government. I mean, I think our federal government can be very nefarious. So we've got to stay vigilant on that.
Are you going to submit legislation like Ron Paul has many, many times to get completely out of the UN? If we just got rid of the UN, we wouldn't be having these wars that were undeclared. We wouldn't be having programs that take away our property rights and our state sovereignty. It's just,
That's a start. My number one priority is a balanced budget amendment. Certainly, I know about war, okay? And I will tell you, UN had nothing to do with Iraq or Afghanistan.
You're wrong.
Pardon me?
Absolutely wrong. The
UN
reason
did?
why we're in there is because we're in there
Under UN sanctions.
following the UN resolution
Yep.
requiring us to be in there. We're part of the UN, we provide, and it's under the control of the UN. okay?
exactly.
Well, then I misspoke. Certainly, the UN operation I've been part of was Kosovo. It didn't work. Okay, it didn't work. Where I've worked in Afghanistan and Iraq, I apologize. You are right. You are right. I guess my lack of seeing these blue helmets of UN troops kind of clouded my vision. You're right. So no, I don't believe in the UN. We should not be ingratiated to anybody. And the bottom line is, I think we're probably bamboozled going into, certainly into Iraq. I understand, and I was there 3 different times.
Who was bamboozled?
I think the American people were. I think that there are these neocons that have existed for quite some time, not just this administration, the Bush administration, but before that. Look, I was in Baghdad all the way to the Syrian border on various missions. Part of that included assessments of what's actually there. Well, I never thought what was advertised to be there, and I think we found out it probably wasn't there. Okay? So, whether it's the UN that got us there or not, I think there's a lot of people that have existed for a long time in our government that are more than happy to have us go to war. And again, I believe that if we're going to go to war, it's got to be discussed very publicly. There's got to be a very specific declaration of war. It's not the president who does that. It's the Congress. If we can't have a declaration of war, then we shouldn't go. If we can't define what win looks like, then we shouldn't go. There's been no definition of what win looks like in Iraq or Afghanistan. What bothers me most is during these presidential debates, not lately, is this whole saber rattling with Iran. Because they may have something or may not have something. And that maybe we should do it on behalf of Israel. No, our Constitution doesn't say we can do preemptive strikes on behalf of anybody. But that was the discussion, and the only person that pushed back was Ron Paul. He was chastised. You know? And so I asked some colleagues, what's the naval order of battle in Iran? They didn't know what I was talking about. If there's such a military threat, what are they going to threaten us with?
Right.
Let me tell you what that is. It's 8 boats, 8 frigates. Okay? And they're like stuff we sold, surplus stuff we sold. I mean, the Brits sold. One of our ships could sink all 8 of those damn things. They're a coastal navy. So there's no threat there. But you would know that listening to the presidential debate and all the saber rattling that was going on. But we've got to ask those questions, okay? And I was really disappointed that Ron Paul didn't ask those questions. You know, to shame these clowns into saying, or trying to justify why they're going to go to another war. And the fact of the matter is, we're still at war in Afghanistan. And that's not going to end so well. Iraq didn't end so well. Afghanistan will probably end worse than Iraq did. And now we're talking about another one in Iran on behalf of Israel? No. So, bottom line is, I do stand corrected. It was a UN resolution. It shouldn't be our guiding force to do anything called national defense or national security, because our national defense, our national security isn't in the Middle East. It's here at home.
Every war that we've been in since the Second World War has been fought under the auspices of the UN.
Mm-hmm.
NATO is a regional arm. NATO is a regional arm of the UN. NATO is a regional arm of the UN.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what, you know, the communists up there in Chicago, out there demonstrating against NATO, it's the communists that have organized this. It's not something that people just, you know, come together and let's rally and let's raise a lot of cane. But it's been planned and organized for a long, long time. And that's what's going on in this country. This Occupy movement is the same kind of a thing. It's not, you know, what's the word that I'm trying to find? It's not just
distraction.
It's planned.
It's planned.
Very well planned.
But
And very well orchestrated.
So quite simply, if we follow the Constitution, it doesn't allow for these kinds of wars.
That's right.
It doesn't allow for that. And you know, my priority is jobs and the economy. But guess what? We talk about war and I'm in Congress, I'm not going to be a shrinking violet. I'm going to challenge these chicken hawks, whatever else we can call them, who've never been to war, but say we ought to go to war. My son and I were in Iraq at the same time. He weighed pretty heavily on me. It weighed heavier on his mother. I got back from Afghanistan. 2 weeks later, he went. So I think we know what this thing's all about. And so to have people say we have to go to war, well, why do we have to do anything? In the Middle East and Central Asia and North Africa? Well, no.
What's wrong with simply minding our own business?
I don't. Trust me, I've dodged a few bullets. I'd see that's probably the best thing to do. You know?
May I take you back to another position?
Yes, sir.
Different subject, balanced budget amendment. I don't know if you all discussed this at all. but
No,
got here.
we didn't. We
You're
just
going to find a lot of opposition to that from strong conservative constitutionalists. If they were interested in balancing the budget, the Congress could do it any session
With a 51% vote.
with a 51% vote.
Rather than
Not even
three-
that, 50% plus one.
Yeah.
50,
And
50
uh,
majority.
what makes us think that they're going to follow the Constitution with an amendment like that when they're not following the Constitution now?
I think the short, easy answer is you have to shame them into it. A lot of people are talking a lot of things, and they haven't delivered. Okay, they haven't delivered.
Graham-Rudman was a balanced budget, but it wasn't an amendment.
Right.
They didn't follow that at
Right,
all.
right. We got to simplify things. I think we have to take small chunks. This is how we need to start righting the ship. It's a balanced budget amendment. We've got to find these people who've been talking about it for a long time and make them live up to their words. I don't know how else to put it, because we're done talking about this thing. There's not much more time to talk about this. We're going to be $16 trillion officially, quickly. We're still on the short side, $16 trillion, but that won't last long. Afghanistan right now is costing anywhere between $10 and $15 billion a month, and that's just what's advertised. We don't know what the real cost is. So the wars don't make sense. If it's not national security, national defense, we shouldn't do it. If it's not going to be debated in a very public forum in the Congress of the United States for everyone to see, we shouldn't do it. And quite frankly, this is a bit controversial, but my thought is if we must go to war, then maybe we should have a draft. Because I think what that does is this.
Including women?
They're serving.
Do you think they ought to be
Yeah.
on the front lines?
Well, the front line's a relative place these days. It's a relative place these days. They're not going to be grunts. They're not going to be Navy SEALs. They're not going to do jobs that women physically can't do.
Well, aren't they doing those now?
No, sir. They're not. The special forces have got women, but their primary role in the special forces are female engagement teams. That's it. They're not snipers. They're not grunts. So there's a place for women in the military. Quite frankly, there's a place for conscientious objectors in the military. They can push papers. They can be logistic guys. So, but my point is with the draft is this. If it's that important that we go to war, then everyone should share the burden. Now, if that's a possibility, how many congressmen and senators really want to push for that war? That might throttle them back. But clearly, we have to do things differently. It should be not under the auspices of the UN or NATO or anybody else. It's got to be within the confines of our Constitution, public debate, formal declaration, and then how are we going to achieve this? I mean, you know, in years past, the war's been paid for by whiskey taxes, specific taxes. We didn't do that this time. Excise taxes.
Now, Martin, are you proposing the draft, you know, as a political strategy, or do you philosophically believe in conscription?
Well, if we have to go to war, yeah, absolutely.
So you do believe in draft?
If it's national, if it's imperative to our nation to go to war because it's really in our best interest, national defense, national security, then everybody should be part of that.
But what constitutes that from your perspective? Because we didn't need conscription when we were having a fight on our territory. You know, in fact, it was philosophically a lot of our forefathers were against it, because it basically says that the government, the federal government, owns you. You know, if they can use conscription for a war, for any type of war, then the problem is just get them to go to any kind of conflict, and they can just come over to your house and say you have to serve.
I think.
And you wind up serving for the military-industrial complex or the political agenda of that term, as opposed to the constitutional and the freedom movement that was started 280 years ago. I mean, you wind up going down a pretty, you wind up going, anytime you give the federal government any small power, they will use that to expand their powers exponentially.
Well, who's in charge of the federal government?
Well, that's just it. You're in charge of the federal government.
But you're in charge of me.
Well, but once you're in office, I can't just take you out.
You can haul me out after 2 years.
Well, that's 2 years, but what if they could declare war next month?
Yeah. Well, I think.
And I get a bullet in the head the month after that. I can't pull you out next.
The reality is this, Robert. we've been at war for over 10 years. The same people have been going to war, okay?
Yeah.
The same people have been going to war. So I would tell you that it's an elective war. I would tell you that. Because we're really not at war right now. We're building a nation. Yeah, a nation, you can call it that. We're rebuilding this country over there, okay? In Iraq, the last 3 or 4 years of that war, same thing. The combat operations were over. Guess what we're doing? Fixing stuff.
Nation building.
Yeah, nation building. So I guess I don't mind fixing something if we broke it, but guess what? We didn't break all the roads, the schools. We shouldn't be involved in the rule of law in Muslim nations. Not because they're Muslims, it's because they choose to live that way. Our Constitution is based on respect for human rights, property. Okay, guess what? That culture, that tradition doesn't recognize the same things. So why have you been trying to pretend that our way of life is going to be good for them when it's not?
That's right.
And so, but the other part of that question, conscription is not a perfect answer. It's not.
Now,
But one thing it will do, if these people are so hell-bent to leather to go to war, but they know that followed by this act of war, or this declaration of war by the Congress properly, that the next step is a draft, I will bet you, whatever you want to bet, that there can be less, a lot of those congressmen and senators are going to be less inclined to want to go to war.
Because
Because they're going to lose their job. A lot of people won't be happy with them. How many wars are really necessary?
very few.
Yeah.
Now, and you know, that goes to the next issue is why do nations, what gives nations the capacity to go to war? When history has shown why most nations won't go to war. What gives nations the capacity to go to war? Fiat currency.
Fiat currency.
Fiat currency.
Usually resources that they think they need.
That's,
that don't belong.
well, you can want a lot of things,
Right.
but again, the question is, what gives a nation a capacity to engage in military conflicts that they shouldn't even get involved in? And that's central banks that offer fiat currencies to give out loans so that countries can purchase.
I got you.
Okay.
I don't disagree with that. Okay, so we've got to fix what we value our money on, right?
That's
So we go back to Constitution. Okay, Congress coins and establishes value of money. Article 1, Section 8. Maybe we talked about this before.
Well,
Section 10 talks about gold and silver. We've not done that for quite some time. And the fact of the matter is, as you know, probably better than me, maybe better than most, you know, the Federal Reserve is a private international bank. We don't have any control of our own destiny until we figure this thing out and get out of that thing. Maybe that's part and parcel with the UN and NATO. I'm sure it is. But
Now,
incrementally, we've got to figure out how to get there.
Now, what I want to know what your philosophical beliefs are. Do you believe? Because I remember one of the comments you stated was, you think we should have a dollar backed by something. You don't know if it's gold or silver, but backed by something. Now, is that what did I misunderstand you? Could you be a little bit more
I think
clear on
very
that?
specifically, dollars got to be backed by something, gold or silver.
Okay.
And I said for the sake of the argument, even if it's backed on copper or titanium or something, at least it's backed on something. But clearly the Constitution lays out what it should be backed on.
Okay,
Gold or
and
silver.
you support that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This way I don't have any misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when you and I may not have that specific conversation, but I think you were there, and I said something.
Yeah.
That's what I said, maybe copper, maybe I was being facetious.
Yeah.
But clearly it says what should be backed, what it's our coin should
Okay.
be backed on.
And the next question I have is, now another comment you had made was, you believe we should audit the Fed, look at the Fed. But you didn't necessarily say anything about eliminating the Fed.
That's the first step, Robert.
Okay, so you believe the first step is to audit the Fed.
Absolutely.
What do you think is the last
To
step?
point out, to get rid of the Fed.
Okay.
To point out the ridiculous that people that don't understand what the Fed's all about. It's this mysterious group of people that meets on our behalf and does great things for the United States of America. Yeah, right. That's what a lot of people believe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, remember how proud Herman Cain was that he was actually on the Fed board?
Yeah.
Remember that?
Mhm.
That was ridiculous. But a lot of people didn't find fault with that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these debates, or forums they're called, what agency would you cut? Wendy Rogers. I'd cut the Fed. Well, that's nice.
What else?
We'll keep that in mind when the Fed becomes a federal agency.
Mm-hmm.
People don't understand that. So incrementally, we got to get there. We got to get there. But audit is the first step.
What is your now I do recall if Vernon Parker and yourself, you both supported the federal income tax. Is that correct?
Support the federal income tax.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
You're not sure if you support
No, I'm
it?
not sure
or-
what the context of that was.
Well, I asked him that, and he basically dodged the question. And I didn't ask you this question, but when you came up, you made that comment during a response to someone else's question. And I wanted to know what your...
You know,
what you
I'm
believe.
looking at that more. Obviously, our federal income tax is broken, okay?
Because you and I had talked in another forum about how the federal government doesn't need a federal income tax because we didn't have it before 1913. And if you didn't have a federal income tax, it would revert the spending levels of our federal government back to 1997. And number three, if you didn't have a federal income tax, you could stimulate the economy much more on a local level. Number two, the people would be a lot more freer. And number three, it would in conjunction with eliminating the Federal Reserve, because if you have the Federal Reserve creating the money, then the money has to be paid back by somebody else, and of course we all get to do that while they spend the money.
Let me tell you where I think I'm going here. Looking at some of these proposals, lower this corporate income tax to 10%, 15%, whatever it was, why not just look at maybe doing away with income tax completely? Why not just look at what Huckabee called a fair tax, which I think could be a consumption tax? If we're talking about repatriating money in industry back to the United States, why did they do it in the first place? Because of the tax structure is too onerous here. So if we had a consumption tax that basically did away with income tax for everybody, not corporations and people, everybody, and the only thing that was exempt would be your primary house where you live, and food that you buy in a grocery store, everything else is taxable. That probably is a better way to look at what we actually need to spend based on what someone chooses to purchase. Pick a number, 18%, 20%, 25%, whatever that percentage is of a purchase, that's their decision. That's their freedom to make that decision whether they want to buy a Chevy or a Cadillac. Okay? But the money's not taken away from them. They're not penalized for
Going to work for a living.
going to work, or not penalized for the dividends they make when they invest. They're not penalized. And going back to the entitlements that are breaking us, now it's on you to decide how you want to retire. And given Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those weren't meant to be the primary sources of retirement. We've got to get back there. The problem we have, though, is those people that have earned those entitlements, which I think a lot of those the entitlement, strong entitlement when they earned it, I think they're locked on. I think they should be locked on. But there's got to be an honest conversation of who should not expect to receive those programs, Social Security, Medicare, based on the fact that you have money to put in, then maybe you should understand that the federal government is going to be there to fund your retirement or your medical care, like they have been in the past, because we can't afford it. But probably a repeal of the 16th Amendment, that sounds pretty crazy. But if we take that away, because how do you adjust something that's broken? It's broken. So we say only for manufacturers we're going to go to 15%. Well, you're picking winners and losers. Okay? I believe in manufacturers because for every manufacturing job that we create, suppliers and vendors are somewhere between 3 and 5 other jobs because of one primary manufacturer. Intel's a great example. Do you know what the population of Chandler was in 1980? Anybody?
Was it 190,000? That's for sure.
It's more than that right now. Do you know what the population was?
No.
Less than 30,000.
No, it's about 270 now.
We're about 240, 250.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've grown. And in 1990, we were under 90,000. And that's because of manufacturing, because of Intel and other suppliers and vendors. But I guess the point is, rather than trying to tweak, the perfect solution for a corporate income tax to bring manufacturing back, repatriate those jobs and that money back to the United States, why not just do away with it? Why not just say that, hey, if the tax situation was so onerous that you left, let's just do away with it.
So if I understand you correctly, you're against the federal income tax, and you are for a consumption tax.
Yeah, I would prefer a consumption tax rather than trying to figure out what the appropriate tax bracket should be for a manufacturer, a warehouse distribution guy, a software engineer.
Now, I can't ask you what federal agencies you would eliminate because those are in the executive branch, which you have absolutely no control.
Wait a
but you
minute.
do have control.
Well, yeah, you do.
How does
They
he?
have control.
How does he have control?
Congress doesn't fund them.
Well, you didn't let me get to my second point. But he doesn't have control of creating or eliminating those agencies. Congress.
Yeah, they do.
They do?
Sure.
How so?
Do the
Pass
first,
the bill.
well,
Pass legislation.
What legislation
Did you know that
created?
the EPA was started by executive order?
But that doesn't come from the Congress. That comes from the president.
Yes, it
Well,
does.
let me just-
They had to enable, anything that they create, they can do away with. They had to enable.
Yeah.
the
So you guys can write executive orders as well.
To enabling education, to enabling legislation, you can defund and then really.
Well, that's my question, because I don't believe, and I'd have to look into that, because I've studied executive orders, and I can't find anywhere where the Congress creates an executive order. Now, the president can
And
create.
defund it.
Wait, I'm just saying that if Congress created the Department of Energy, which they did, they can do away with it.
So they did create it, the Department of
Absolutely. Now,
Energy.
EPA was created by executive order.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if the executive agencies that you have not created, would you not fund any of them that you don't believe are constitutional or the ones that we actually
Well,
need?
right now, let me give you my assessment. I've never been in Congress. Ron Paul has. He's got 5 agencies he wants to cut. Guess what? He's got that experience. For me to tell you or anybody else this is what I would cut without ever having been in Congress, I think I'd be half blind. If I'm going to tell you this, that I believe in doing something, I got to see it for I want to have the benefit of Ron Paul and other people's experience. That this is what they saw, and this is why it needs to be cut. But I think right now, without getting into the cutting game, cut this, cut that, eliminate. I think cutting across the board budgets and personnel is a sane start. And the metrics would be maybe for a fiscal year. And I think we'll see who's standing. If DOD was cut by $500 billion, which it was, and this sequester could be cut by another $500 billion, I guess. We don't figure out some resolution of the budget. But they were cut by $500 billion. And I think that every agency should not be exempt, with the exception of DOD, to have a budget and personnel cut across the board. Department of Education, that would be, I think, a very good department to push down and block grant to the federal, from the federal level to the state level. That's going to be a better, cheaper, and probably more effective service provided at the local level versus the federal level. In education, one size doesn't fit all. How many semiconductor manufacturer plants they have in Vermont? I don't think they have
I
any.
don't think any.
They make a lot of syrup there. But we have this federal standard of education, one size fits all. That's stupid. It doesn't work. But I think the ideal solution, whatever the time period is, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 3 years, I don't know what that time period is to get back to the agencies that are constitutionally mandated. I think that's the solution.
I was just about to ask, isn't that little book right there the template as to what needs to stay and what needs to go? I mean, literally, because I know that Ron Paul and whoever else saying I'm going to cut this, I'm going to shut down this cabinet position, whatever. That's just the ones they believe they can get away with, and I believe Ron Paul knows that 95% of the federal government needs to go away, but these 5 cabinet positions are the ones he's got a target on.
Yes, sir, in the first year.
In the first year.
In the first year. He didn't say that's where he's going to stop. He said in the first year.
Right.
And with that, there was commensurate savings of over $1 trillion in the first year. Yeah. And that's because Ron Paul's been there for a lot of years, and he probably knows, and I'm sure he's right. But all I'm telling you, for me to make promises, I'm going to cut all these agencies, but I don't even know what I'm talking about because I've never been there. I think...
Well, I know you can't cut those agencies. You're only one of many, but
right.
I want to know what your philosophical belief is on those agencies, because I know that if you go in, if you're chosen by the people to be in office for 2 years, and these things don't happen, I can't necessarily blame you.
As long as you voted with your philosophical
that's
philosophically, where I'm at is here. DOD got cut by $500 billion. We've got a war going on. We haven't collapsed. Okay, so everybody across the board, in my view of the world, is not to be exempt from cuts, personnel and budget. And Department of Education, I think, is one of those, and there might be others, one of those agencies that can be pushed down to the local level. Okay, and maybe it goes way after that, But the end state would be this. The budget, or the departments that are left standing will be those that are constitutionally mandated. And it's 3 years, it's 5 years, I don't know what the time frame is. But I don't want to be disingenuous and say, you know what, I'm going to cut 5 agencies, I'm going to do 3 agencies. I mean, because I don't know that. I'd be lying. I don't know what that brings to the table. Ron Paul does. Why? Because he's dealt with it for 30 years. God bless him. And it might be a situation where I sit down with him and don't understand, how and when and why these get cut. I have no problem with that. But right now, I'm telling you, I'm not an incumbent. I've never been in the Congress. And for me to parrot what somebody else says, I think that's very disingenuous. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, because it should happen. But the end state is simply this. Whatever that time frame is, then we should get back to the agencies that are constitutionally mandated.
Which ones are those?
Well, Commerce is one, as crazy as that sounds. I think the Post Office is one. There's 8 or 10.
Department of Defense.
DOD, absolutely. DOD, yeah.
Department of State.
Yeah.
But there are, where in there is the federal government authorized to get involved in our education system?
They're not.
It's not. What about the...
Where are they involved? Where are they told to get involved in marriage?
They're not.
They're not.
What about energy?
Is it a federal marriage license or a state marriage license?
Right.
No, they're not. Energy, there are bogus departments.
Got
That's right. We know that.
EPA,
So you don't
agriculture.
have to go to Congress to know that those are the ones that need to be eliminated eventually.
Yes, sir. I agree with you eventually. But I'm telling you that if I'm looking you in the eye and you're telling which departments I'm going to cut, I'm going to
No. I want to know, if you look me in the eye, I want to know that you'd be willing to vote on legislation to eliminate the Department of Energy, Department of Education, Department of Commerce. What do we need to...
And not only vote for it, but
work to eliminate it.
either co-sponsor it or write it.
All right.
And that's where I'm at. Again, my end state, is this. Whatever the time frame is to get down with those agencies, those departments that are constitutionally mandated. Okay? And if there's something that has happened that isn't in the Constitution that everyone says that we need, well, we'll have a very public discussion about that. Okay? Post office is constantly mandated, isn't it? Do we need a post office?
Never made a dime in 237 years.
But there you go. That's the department's constitutionally mandated. Do we really need it? Maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe we
Okay.
should privatize.
Yeah, maybe we could.
And if we do it the right way, then
Yeah.
Amtrak.
so be it.
But
So,
Well, the trains are federal.
Can we-
Constitutionally mandated.
you
No,
know,
go
with
ahead,
their,
go ahead.
can we talk about another matter? Are you familiar with
If Rob will let us.
what they call the North American Union?
Yeah.
They don't want to call it that, and they don't want to call it anymore the Security and Prosperity Partnership. But what they are calling it now is the Executive Leadership Council or something like that. And our DOD, the head of our Panetta, Leon Panetta,
Yeah.
just met with his counterpart from Canada and Mexico this last month. And now, shortly, I can't remember when, but shortly, the heads of state are going to meet over in Hawaii and discuss how we can merge our 3 countries into one country, with tantamount to the same thing that happened in Europe.
Yeah.
We started off with NAFTA, right? And then we tried to go with the free trade area of the Americas, and that didn't fly because we raised so much cane about that. And now they're trying to do this with they want to merge our governments. They want to open our borders totally. The 3 countries do.
For trade.
And so I'm wondering, are you familiar with this? And
Yes.
are you familiar with the Canamex corridor?
Yes.
And what's your position?
Anything that makes us less sovereign is not good. Anytime we're dependent on other countries for our well-being, that's not a good thing. Okay, when I talk about securing the borders, that needs to happen. There's a pretty bad war going on in Mexico right now. There doesn't appear to be much war going on in Canada, but that doesn't exclude them from not having a secure border there.
Right.
From a tactical perspective, the biggest threat isn't Mexico. It's a border that's much bigger than Mexico that we don't pay attention to. Okay, but we need to secure the borders, and part and parcel of that is to protect our commerce and not be dependent on another country or nations, whether our neighbors or not. We should have treaties and trade agreements with them, but we shouldn't be part of a one monolithic partnership that really can undermine our sovereignty, the value of our currency. Europe is having a pretty big problem right now. Okay, and But you don't hear much about England. Okay, they stuck with the pound. They're not doing great right now either, by the way. But they're not as bad. They're not doing as bad as those other countries went to the European, what's the euro dollar, whatever the hell that thing's called. You know, and so we don't look at that as something that could happen, and then we're dumb. And you know, again, it shouldn't happen. I don't know why Panetta's got a role in this thing. Okay, but again, it boils down to citizens being informed and asking questions and becoming more informed. To be beholden to anybody other than ourselves for our well-being, and that's what the Constitution says. It's our own country that's going to give us the benefit of our rights. Not an agreement that's, you know, this northern hemisphere.
Well, I mean, related to that, by some estimates, we're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar from foreign nations, China, Russia, various others.
Probably not Russia.
Well, Russia and China now don't have to use the American dollar in order to exchange in commodities exchange. The IMF is making moves to replace the American dollar from the International Reserve.
Right.
So, what, if anything, do you think you can bring to the table in regards to, you know, this is a pretty big looming problem over us right now, and I think why Leon Panetta is involved is that, you know, they're looking for ways to deal with the fact that we are facing imminent collapse. What do you have? I know that's a huge question. It's not really even a question. It's more like
We have to deal with the debt and the deficit spending. We've got to stop spending what we don't have. Back to what I think was alluded to earlier, we don't have the capacity to raise taxes or cut taxes. The capacity is not here. The only logical choice we have is to grow the economy. So that probably leads to a radical solution that says, you know what, amend, you know, do away with the 16th Amendment. Come back with a consumption tax or a fair, whatever you want to call it. Exempt primary residence, shelter, and food you buy at a grocery store. Everything else is taxable. The manufacturing side, it brings them back. It brings those manufacturers back to left because they couldn't operate without
Just a comment on that. How about just canceling out the debt with the Federal Reserve? That'd lower the deficit by more than 50%. And have the Federal Reserve issue out interest-free loans to the federal government.
So
Money we owe ourselves?
who runs the Federal Reserve?
The
12
national
members.
bankers.
International Bank. So do you think they'd really do that for us?
Well,
I think it's a shell game.
It's not money it's owed to us, it's money that's owed to private banks.
I think it's a shell game. I think the Federal Reserve, you know, again, should go away, but incrementally, how does it go away? You audit it first, you bring up the ridiculousness of this international private bank that really controls our destiny. It's not a good thing.
but we're never going to have, there's no use doing a balanced budget unless you get the monetary policy change first. They're trying to change the tire and car, they're still driving.
What about, you know, would you support or even implement competing currencies that Ron Paul wants so that on local economies we can phase out those fiat dollars? Because just like the gentleman alluded to, if we lose the petrodollar, we lose the reserve currency, the whole game is over. And it's going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen over a couple of weeks or months or years. And that's going to have a catastrophic effect on our country overnight.
That's why we're trying to set up a sound money bill for Arizona, and 15 other states are doing the same thing. Utah has done it. And now we're trying to do the same thing here in Arizona.
Now, unfortunately, I couldn't ask you that question because that has nothing to do with what you're running for, because that's on the federal level. But one of the issues on the state level is, you know, is implementing electronic gold, implementing, you know, competing currencies, because constitutionally we do have that authority. With a bigger bat to play, you know, to play the role in the federal government to support the states as much as possible, because we unfortunately, if we, if Russia and China can, you know, everyone's going to catch on what they're doing. Bigger and bigger countries are catching, smaller countries are seeing what the larger countries are doing with their monetary policy. And as soon as too many countries realize that the petrodollar, the American dollar, is just monopoly money, we can't afford, it's going to collapse our economy overnight.
It is.
You realize that's the perfect way though to get the United States to
And
join.
so how about,
Yeah, that's
let's
true.
change speed. How about if we really look at this petrodollar, this our dependence on oil? How about we start saying, let's really ease these regulatory environments that will disallow, whatever that really means, us from exploring and producing oil here. Oil production or oil exploration creates jobs, okay? And once you find it through an exploration process and then you produce it, it creates more jobs. So to kill two birds with one stone, you again, talking about repatriating companies and investing back in the United States, okay, let's talk about energy. We're dependent on foreign oil. But if we ease the regulations, why? Because we're looking at an emergency here. We're looking at crisis here. We're too dependent on foreign oil, okay? And whether we start with a Keystone Pipeline or not, it doesn't matter. Let's look at exploration in the United States, the production in the United States. It's repatriating those monies, investing back in the United States. It's creating jobs, and it also lessens our dependence on foreign oil. That's a good place to start. That's a great argument to have right out of the chute, because what choice do we have? We're already hostage to the petrodollar. And going back to the Persian Gulf.
Actually, I got a.
Let me finish this. Going back to the Persian Gulf, how much oil does the United States derive from the Persian Gulf?
No, I don't know, it's like 35%.
35%. No, 70.
The United States from the Persian Gulf,
Or
How much oil
that's our import is 70. I don't know from the Persian Gulf.
it's less than 15%.
Oh,
This
really?
North Africa thing, this Libya thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pathetic. It's pathetic. But we have to do these things, back to your point, because the UN and NATO says we have to do it. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. But it does tell us that we're dependent on foreign oil. Well, let's just stop that. Let's just stop that. Let's just say, you know what? We're going to explore, we're going to produce here. Bring back jobs, bring back investment, create jobs, not the government, private sector.
Creating an environment that's conducive for investors to want to create jobs.
Yes, sir, and keeping what they create, okay? And then lessen the requirement or the dependence on foreign oil. That's probably a good start.
Quit listening so much to the environmentalists. You look at Anwar and why we're not drilling up there. You know how minuscule that is compared to the rest of the whole area? It's minuscule.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what oil reserves we have in Arizona or what gas reserves we have in Arizona. I don't know. But let's just think about this. But let's just think about this. How much of the land is owned by the federal government or the states? A lot.
Oh, yeah.
So from a very selfish perspective, in Arizona, if we started exploring and actually we might find something to produce, this state would benefit. Any state with the reserves that are state or federally owned land would be a big beneficiary. So hey, it's a good place to start. But it goes back to the regulatory environment and the tax environment. It's got to change. Yes, sir.
How do you feel about Boone Pickens' plan, like running our 18-wheelers and cars on natural gas, since we are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas? So it makes sense to do that, I would think. I mean,
Well, it's additive to what we have right now. We're not going to get away from fossil fuel anytime soon. But guess what? If it lessens our dependence by any amount, why not?
yeah.
Well, it's a matter of economics. It's expensive to convert all these engines over to natural gas, but natural gas is, we've got a glut of natural
We've got
gas.
about 3 trillion cubic feet
Oh, yeah.
of natural gas underneath our...
But that's part of the solution. It's additive. It's just like solar. Solar got a bad rap because of all the crap that happened with cylinders, everything like that. But you know what? It's still a part of a solution. It's not going to take over, fossil-based fuel or coal, but it's additive. Biomass. You know what that is?
Yeah,
It's garbage.
Yeah,
Okay,
oils.
it's buried. Guess what happens? Methane gas is produced as a natural byproduct. There's ways to speed up that process. There's ways not to put in the landfill. But guess what? You put in this big burn tube that I call it. It's actually gasification. It's the opposite of incineration. At the end of the day, this biomass that goes in are garbage. When it's superheated, the end product is synthetic methane gas. It's fuel.
Same thing you got from the movie Thunderdome with what's his name?
You're showing your age.
No doubt.
Oh man, Mel Gibson's Thunderdome.
But the
Same
bottom line
philosophy of
is those things are doable. It's additive. If it lessens our dependence on fossil fuel or foreign oil, then we should be doing it.